Part 1, Beginnings. Born on a full moon in Würzburg, Germany, February 3rd, 1950. But let's go back a ways to see what led up to this event. My mother was Latvian and already 38 when she gave birth to me in one of the refugee displacement camps in the U.S. occupied zone in Würzburg, Germany, after World War II. I'm not entirely sure who my real father was. After Reynes, who I lived with and thought was my dad, died in 1982, Mom shared a secret with me. There had been romantic encounters with her and Elliot Roosevelt, the third son of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, in 1949. Elliot had been holding clandestine meetings in Latvia with the Soviets in order to obtain air routes for Howard Hughes' TWA into the USSR. My mom and Elliot met a total of 3 times. There was never a paternal DNA test performed. I still don't know who the real father was, but Reynes raised me and we had a comfortable life once we moved to the West Coast in 1953. Elliot did play a huge role in our lives. He was instrumental in Mom joining the CIA and eventually my dad and I as well. My mom had gotten separated from Reynes during the chaos of the war ending. He had worked as a civil engineer who built roads and had 500 men under him. But he was also part of the resistance movement in Latvia against the Soviet Union. The guerrilla fighters, which at one time numbered 40,000, were most active from 1940 to the mid-50s. The Forest Brothers, as they were called, were the freedom fighters who fought to regain national independence from both Nazi and Soviet occupation. Small bands of between 5 and several dozen partisans would ambush enemy soldiers on roads and small towns and villages. These combat squads lived in well-camouflaged dugouts deep in the forest. They would avoid the larger squads. Reynes did not talk about these years much, as he was a quiet man unless he had been drinking. In later years, I did my own research and found out that the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, which was the predecessor of the CIA, assisted the Forest Brothers during the war. They would drop off teams of officers to train the resistance fighters in their work of sabotage, destruction, and general mayhem. My father took part in this for a couple of years until one of his communist friends told him he was identified and on a black list. My mother was a switchboard operator in the 40s. When callers made a telephone call, they were first connected to a switchboard operator who would then manually connect the caller to the correct circuit. She had a part to play in the resistance movement too, as she sometimes came upon valuable information. She was able to intercept a fair number of documents and encryption codes exposing Soviet operations. Sooner or later, this was not going to end well because if they were found out, it meant either death or deportation to Siberia. So my mom and Reynes took what they could carry on bicycles and pedaled 80 miles to the capital of Riga, where they boarded a retreating Nazi ship back to Germany. There, along with others who did not want to live under what was to become as Soviet domination, set up their lives for almost 5 years. Germany was in ruin after the war, and manpower was needed to start rebuilding the country. Among other tasks, Reynes built wooden coffins, and Mom cooked potato soup in huge vats. The U.S. occupational army in Germany became a degenerative unit after the war. Poorly trained and ill-disciplined, they took part in the lucrative black market that developed. Cigarettes, chocolate, liquor, small foodstuffs, and especially wristwatches were highly sought after, and the U.S. soldiers had access. It is here where Elliott Roosevelt recruited my parents to work surveillance for the CIA. They were to report on what was going on with this in their camp. I don't have the details on how this was arranged with Elliott because my mom never disclosed everything. But one perk that came with it was that my parents and young infant son of 6 months old were allowed to fly to the United States when their turn came up, instead of the long boat ride that most refugees had to endure. And part 2, childhood. We began our new life in Michigan, being sponsored by the Red Cross who had brought us over. It was 2 years living in Bay City and Grand Rapids before my parents took the advice of a friend to move to a warmer climate in California. We ended up in the quaint little college town of Palo Alto, home of Stanford University. Rainus worked as a janitor and Mom cleaned houses, and before long earned $500 as a down payment to buy a little 2-bedroom house for $10,000 in a quiet neighborhood surrounded by Victorian mansions. I was around 6 or 7 years old and still very sensitive to my surroundings, so could pick up on the 2 old ladies that haunted the house and scaring little kids like me. Apparently, they were the previous owners who had passed on but didn't quite want to let go of their abode. Anyway, life was good growing up in the 50s. School was 2 blocks away. I had many friends to play with on the block. We had just purchased our first black and white TV. We were comfortable. During my elementary school years, I had 3 main interests: playing outdoors, watching TV, and playing with my little army and cowboy and Indian figurines. I was a normal kid. Entering junior high school, it got rough. This is where I started questioning what was going on. Where am I? Who am I? Frankly, it really got to me. It was the hardest time of my life, comparable to each of the 3 marriage breakups I went through. The only thing that helped me cruise through junior high and high school was my athleticism. During physical education class in the 7th grade, the teacher saw me do a left-handed layup to the basket. I was right-handed, and nobody else could shoot with their offhand. He recruited me for the school team, and from then on, I had a focus: basketball. My junior and senior year in high school, we were league champs. I made all league my senior year and set a new league record, shooting 54% from the field. In my senior year, I started searching for meaning in life for earnest. Now it was going to get fun. To be continued.